You'll never be like your brother, my parents sneered. I smiled coldly, tossing the bank receipts, then explained why I funded his luxury life. Dad paled, stammering, Where did you get those? The Kansas heat was absolutely brutal that afternoon. It was late July, the kind of heavy, suffocating summer day in Wichita where the air feels thick enough to cut with a knife, and the cicadas in the old oak trees scream so loudly you can barely hear yourself think. The backyard of my parents' house was packed. The smell of grilled ribs, cheap beer, and overly sweet potato salad hung in the air. Kids were running through the sprinklers, cousins were arguing over a game of cornhole, and the adults were huddled around the patio furniture. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American family reunion. But I knew the truth. I was 30 years old, standing on the edge of the patio with a plastic cup of lukewarm water in my hand, feeling completely detached from the people whose blood ran in my veins. The chatter was a dull roar until my father's voice sliced through the humid air. He was standing near the grill, holding a pair of tongs like a scepter, his face flushed from the heat and the beers. We had just been talking about careers. I had made the mistake of trying to share a recent milestone in my graphic design business. Before I could even finish my sentence, he turned to me, his eyes narrowing with that familiar, dismissive glare I had known my whole life. The patio went eerily quiet. Even the kids seemed to stop yelling for a second. You will never be like your brother, my parents sneered, almost in unison, though it was my dad who threw the heaviest punch. He pointed the metal tongs at me, shaking his head. Julian is building an empire. He has a mind for real business. You are just playing around with your little pictures on a computer. It is time you face reality, Gwen. The words landed heavily on the wooden deck, but they did not hit me in the chest the way they used to. A year ago, that sentence would have sent me running to the bathroom to cry quietly so no one would see. 5 years ago, it would have made me work 100 hours a week just to try and prove them wrong. But today? Today was entirely different. The old Gwen was dead. The desperate, approval-seeking daughter had been buried under a mountain of lies, deceit, and unpaid invoices. I did not flinch. I did not look down at my shoes. I looked directly into my father's eyes, then shifted my gaze to my mother, who was sitting next to him, nodding along with her lips pursed in agreement. My brother, Julian, stood a few feet away, swirling a craft beer, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his face. He loved this. He lived for moments where he was elevated by pushing me down. I felt a strange, absolute calm wash over me. The kind of calm you feel when you have nothing left to lose. I set my plastic cup down on the glass patio table. The condensation left a small ring. Then I reached into the oversized canvas tote bag slung over my shoulder. My fingers brushed against the thick, heavy black binder I had spent the last 2 weeks preparing. I pulled it out and slammed it onto the center of the picnic table. The loud thud echoed over the hum of the cicadas. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was cold, sharp, and hollow. Then explain why I funded his luxury life, I said, my voice steady and carrying across the entire yard. The color immediately drained from my father's face. My mother froze, her eyes darting to the black binder. To understand how I got to this patio, holding a bomb that was about to destroy my entire family, you have to go back. Way back. You have to understand what it means to be the invisible child. Growing up in our modest house in Wichita, I learned very early on that there was a hierarchy, and I was firmly at the bottom of it. My father, Richard, was a man who worshipped traditional success. He ran a mid-sized hardware supply store and believed that real value was measured in firm handshakes, loud voices, and aggressive business tactics. My mother, Cynthia, was a traditional housewife whose entire identity revolved around maintaining the image of a perfect family. And then there was Julian. Julian was 2 years older than me, but in my parents' eyes, he might as well have been a god walking among mortals. Julian was the golden calf. Whatever he did was brilliant. Whatever he wanted, he got. If he broke a window playing baseball in the yard, my mother would say he had a strong, athletic arm. If I accidentally spilled a glass of milk, I was clumsy and careless. It was a million tiny paper cuts that slowly bled my self-esteem dry over 2 decades. I can still vividly remember a Tuesday evening when I was 12 years old. I had entered a statewide art competition for middle schoolers and won first place. I had spent 3 weeks drawing a charcoal portrait of a stray dog I had seen near the train tracks. I poured my soul into it, getting charcoal dust under my fingernails, ruining my favorite shirt. When they handed me that cheap, plastic gold-painted trophy, I felt like I had finally done something worthy of my family's attention. I brought it home, bursting with pride, and placed it right in the center of the living room mantelpiece, right above the fireplace where everyone could see it. I waited all evening for my dad to come home and notice. When he finally walked through the door, he threw his keys in the bowl, glanced at the mantel, and said, "What is this junk doing up here?" Before I could even speak, my mother hurried over, grabbed my trophy, and shoved it onto a dusty bookshelf in the corner of the hallway. "We need to make room, Richard," she told him with a bright smile. Julian's junior varsity baseball team made the regional finals. He is bringing his participation plaque home tomorrow. A participation plaque. For a regional final, they didn't even win. That plaque sat in the center of the mantel for 5 years. My art trophy stayed in the dark corner until the gold paint started chipping off. That was the dynamic. Julian was loud, charismatic, and incredibly good at taking credit for things he barely worked for. He coasted through high school with solid C grades, but my parents praised his networking skills. He went to a local college, barely graduated, and immediately started bouncing between vague consulting and entrepreneurial ventures. He always wore expensive suits he couldn't afford and talked loudly on his phone about closing deals and synergy. My father ate it up. He saw himself in Julian. He saw the aggressive businessman he always wanted to be. I, on the other hand, was quiet. I observed. I liked to draw, to design, to create. To my parents, this was not a career, it was a cute little hobby. They treated my existence as a waiting room until I found a husband to take care of me. They didn't understand the digital world, they didn't understand freelance work, and they certainly didn't respect it. I spent my entire adolescence trying to shrink into the wallpaper, hoping that if I didn't cause any trouble, maybe they would eventually look my way and say they were proud of me. But the spotlight was fixed firmly on Julian, and the bulb was so blindingly bright, there was no light left for anyone else. By my mid-20s, I had moved out into a tiny, run-down apartment on the edge of town. It was the kind of place where the kitchen sink dripped a slow, agonizing rhythm all night, and the heating barely worked in the winter. But it was mine. It was my sanctuary. I had decided that if my parents were not going to give me validation, I was going to earn it from the rest of the world. I threw myself into graphic design with a manic intensity. I wanted to build a portfolio so undeniable that my family would be forced to acknowledge my existence. I became a ghost to my friends. While people my age were going out to bars on Friday nights, going on dates, and taking weekend road trips, I was sitting in my dark living room, the glow of my dual monitors illuminating my tired face at 3 a.m. I lived on cheap ramen noodles, black coffee, and sheer willpower. I took on every miserable freelance gig I could find. I designed menus for failing diners, logos for dog walkers, and flyers for local bakeries. I dealt with clients who wanted 20 revisions for a $50 job. I smiled, I swallowed my pride, and I did the work. Slowly, it started to pay off. I began building a solid reputation. My skills sharpened. I landed a branding package for a well-known local bakery called Mrs. Gable's. It was a complete overhaul, new logo, storefront signage, packaging, the works. When the project launched, the bakery saw a massive spike in foot traffic, and a local business magazine even wrote a small article about the rebrand, mentioning my name. I was ecstatic. I bought a physical copy of the magazine, carefully folded it, and brought it to Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I walked in feeling like I was carrying a gold medal. We sat down at the dining table, the smell of my mother's dry meatloaf filling the room. I waited for a lull in the conversation. Actually, I started, my heart beating a little faster. I have some great news. A local magazine featured my design work for the Gable Bakery rebrand. Here, I brought a copy. I slid the glossy magazine across the table toward my father. He didn't even reach for it. He just glanced at the cover, took a bite of his mashed potatoes, and chewed slowly. "That is nice, Gwen," he mumbled with his mouth half full. He didn't even use my full name, just a dismissive grunt. Then he immediately turned his body entirely toward my brother. "Speaking of real news," my dad boomed, his voice suddenly full of life. "Julian, tell your mother about the new corporate client you are courting. The logistics firm, right?" Julian leaned back in his chair, folding his arms behind his head, looking like a king on a throne. "Yeah, Dad. It is a massive account. We're talking major restructuring. The CEO basically begged me to come on board as a consultant. It was all buzzwords. It was all hot air. Julian hadn't closed a real deal in 2 years, but he knew how to play the game." My mother gasped, clapping her hands together. "Oh, Julian. That is incredible. We are so proud of you. You have such a brilliant mind for these things." I sat there, staring at my unread magazine sitting next to a gravy boat. I felt a familiar lump forming in my throat, hot and tight. I quietly pulled the magazine back off the table and slipped it into my bag. No one noticed. No one asked to see it later. I realized then that it didn't matter if I designed the next Apple logo or won a Nobel Prize. In their eyes, I was just Gwen, the girl who played with colors on a screen, while Julian was the titan of industry. I drove back to my leaky apartment that night in silence, telling myself that their approval didn't matter. But the truth was, it was eating me alive. I was starving for their love, and I was about to pay a massive price to try and buy it. The illusion of our stable family shattered on a rainy Tuesday in November. I was 26 years old. I remember the exact moment the phone rang. I was in the middle of vectoring a complicated illustration, my eyes burning from the screen, when my mother's name popped up on my phone. I answered, expecting her usual complaints about the weather or asking me to come fix her internet router. Instead, I heard a sound I had never heard before. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably. A deep, guttural, terrifying sound. "Gwen," she choked out, barely able to breathe. "It is cancer. Stage 3. The doctors, they say it is aggressive." The floor dropped out from under me. The world funneled down into a tight, echoing tunnel. Everything else ceased to exist. We rushed to the hospital. The waiting room was painted a depressing, sterile pale yellow, smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. When the doctor finally sat us down to explain the treatment plan, the surgeries, the aggressive rounds of chemotherapy, the radiation, the reality of the situation hit us not just emotionally, but financially. Our family was not wealthy. My father's hardware store had been struggling for years, losing out to massive corporate chains. He was drowning in debt he had hidden from us. When the hospital's financial coordinator handed us the estimated out-of-pocket costs, even with their crappy insurance, my father physically slumped in his chair. He looked old, defeated, and terrified. He started pacing the hallway, muttering about bankruptcy and losing the house. I looked at Julian. This was his moment. This was the time for the golden boy, the successful entrepreneur, the titan of industry, to step up and save the day. Julian cleared his throat, adjusting the collar of his expensive dress shirt. "Listen, Dad," Julian said, looking everywhere but at our mother. "My assets are completely tied up right now in a long-term venture capital hold. My liquidity is it is basically zero. I cannot pull cash out without facing massive penalties." "I am so sorry." It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. He didn't have investments. He had credit card debt and a fake lifestyle to maintain. But my parents accepted his excuse immediately. "We understand, sweetie," my mother whispered from her hospital bed, reaching out to pat his hand. "Do not ruin your business for this." I felt a surge of adrenaline, fueled by a mixture of profound love for my mother and a desperate, pathetic desire to finally be the hero. I stepped forward. "I will do it," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I have some savings. My freelance business is picking up. I will set up a separate bank account, a family care fund. I will cover the out-of-pocket medical bills. We are not losing the house, and Mom is getting the best treatment." For the first time in my entire life, My father looked at me with something resembling respect. My mother cried and called me her angel. In that sterile hospital room, I made a deal with the devil. I thought I was saving my mother's life, but I was actually walking into a 4-year nightmare that would drain my youth, my bank account, and my sanity. The math was brutal. To keep my mother in the private oncology clinic and to stop the bill collectors from calling my father's house, I had to generate an extra $1,350 every single month, strictly in disposable cash. That did not include my own rent, my own groceries, or my own utilities. For a 26-year-old freelance designer, that number was a mountain. But I started climbing it anyway. The next 4 years became a blur of absolute misery and exhaustion. I stopped living and started surviving. I said yes to every single job that crossed my inbox, no matter how awful the client or how low the pay. I became a machine. I woke up at 5 in the morning, worked until midnight, slept for a few hours, and did it again. My apartment turned into a prison cell. I canceled my gym membership, I stopped buying new clothes, and my diet devolved into whatever I could buy in bulk for under $10. I sacrificed my body. By year 2, I developed severe carpal tunnel syndrome in my right wrist from clicking a mouse 14 hours a day. The pain was a sharp, burning needle shooting up my forearm. I had to buy thick, rigid wrist braces and sleep with them on. The smell of cheap, minty muscle rub became my permanent perfume. I sacrificed my youth. While my peers were falling in love, getting married, and taking vacations to Mexico, I was sitting in my living room, crying quietly into my keyboard because a client refused to pay a $300 invoice. I had been dating a really great guy named Mark for about 6 months when the diagnosis happened. By month 8 of the treatment, he left me. He told me he couldn't handle the stress, that I was never present, that all I talked about was work and money. I didn't even fight him on it. I just watched him walk out the door, knowing he was right. I had no room in my heart for romance. It was entirely consumed by anxiety. Every month, like clockwork, I transferred $1,350 into the Family Care Fund account. I watched the numbers in my personal savings drop to near zero, over and over again. But I told myself it was worth it. It was for my mother. But the hardest part wasn't the work or the poverty. The hardest part was the hospital visits. Because my father had to keep his failing store open, and Julian was always in meetings, I was the one who drove my mother to her chemotherapy appointments. I would sit in those awful, vinyl reclining chairs next to her bed for 4 hours at a time, watching the toxic chemicals drip into her veins. I would hold her hand when she felt nauseous. I would wipe the sweat from her forehead. But even then, in the darkest, quietest moments of her suffering, I was not the center of her universe. I remember one specific Tuesday vividly. I had stayed up for 36 hours straight to finish a website design so I could take the afternoon off to drive her to the clinic. I was exhausted, my eyes bloodshot, my wrist throbbing. My mother was hooked up to the floor, looking pale and fragile. A nurse walked in to check her vitals. My mother immediately pulled out her phone. She didn't introduce me as the daughter who was paying for the very chair she was sitting in. Instead, she swiped to a photo on Facebook. "Look," my mother said to the nurse, her voice suddenly bright. "This is my son, Julian. He is at a charity golf tournament today with some big executives. Isn't he handsome? He is doing so well for himself." The nurse smiled politely. I sat there, invisible. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I was giving her my blood, my sweat, and my future, and she was using the breath I bought her to brag about the son who hadn't contributed a single dime. But I pushed the hurt down. I swallowed it. I told myself she was sick, she was scared, and I just needed to keep working. By the beginning of the 3rd year, the intense chemo and radiation had worked. My mother's cancer went into remission. The immediate terror of death faded, replaced by the chronic, grinding reality of long-term medical debt and maintenance medications. The monthly bills decreased slightly, but the financial hole my parents were in was massive. I was still transferring over $1,000 a month into the Family Care Fund just to keep the collection agencies away and pay for her expensive post-treatment scans. One Sunday evening, my parents invited Julian and me over for dinner. It was a rare occasion where we were all in the same room without the shadow of a hospital hanging over us. My father cleared his throat, tapping his fork against his water glass to get our attention. He looked very serious, very authoritative. Now that the worst is behind us, my dad started, looking directly at Julian, completely bypassing me. We need to talk about the family finances. The medical fund has been a lifeline, but we need to manage it smarter. We need to consolidate the remaining medical debt with the store's overhead. We need a strategy. I perked up. I thought, finally, we were going to sit down and look at the spreadsheets I had made. I thought I was finally going to get a thank you for single-handedly funding their survival. So, my father continued, his chest puffing out slightly. I have asked Julian to officially take over the management of the Family Care Fund. He is going to consolidate the accounts, handle the disbursements, and use his financial connections to maybe invest some of the float to generate a return. He is stepping up to handle the stressful business side of things. I froze. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I looked at Julian. He was wearing a tailored suit jacket over a casual t-shirt, looking incredibly solemn and important. He nodded slowly. It is a big responsibility, Dad, but family comes first. I will get our books balanced. I have some guys in wealth management who owe me favors. Wait, I said, my voice shaking. The room suddenly felt very small. What do you mean, manage the fund? That is the account I set up. Every single dollar in that account comes from my freelance business. I transfer the money in, and I pay the bills directly online. There is nothing to manage. It is just my money paying your debts. My father scowled, clearly annoyed that I was interrupting his grand plan. Gwen, do not be dramatic. You do not understand corporate finance. You are just a freelancer. Paying a bill online is not financial management. Julian understands leveraging assets. He is taking a massive burden off your shoulders. You should be thanking him. Thanking him. I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. For what? He hasn't put a single penny into that account. That is enough, Gwen, my mother snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. Your brother is doing us a huge favor. His time is very valuable. Stop being so territorial over a bank account. We are a family, we share the load. Share the load. The words echoed in my head, absurd and cruel. I looked at Julian. He gave me a sympathetic, patronizing smile, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over a toy. I felt a wave of dizziness. I was exhausted. I was so bone-tired from working 14-hour days that I literally did not have the energy to fight them. I gave up. I handed over the login details to the account later that week. I kept transferring my hard-earned money into it month after month, but Julian was now the one holding the keys. I didn't realize it at the time, but handing over that password was the biggest mistake of my life. It was the moment the prince took the throne, built entirely on my shattered back. Thank you for following the story. If you empathize with what Gwen is going through, please like the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next parts, and don't forget to leave a comment letting me know the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more viewers. Thank you so much. Fast forward a couple of years. My mother was officially in long-term remission, which was a massive relief, but the financial bleeding had not stopped. She still needed expensive maintenance medications, quarterly scans, and specialized physical therapy. I was still dutifully grinding away at my freelance business, pouring over $1,000 every single month into the family care fund. I was exhausted, my social life was non-existent, and I had not taken a single day off in 4 years. But I thought we were surviving. I thought we were in this together. Then came the Sunday dinner that changed everything. I dragged myself to my parents' house, feeling the familiar dull ache in my wrist. When I walked into the living room, Julian was holding court. He looked entirely different. He was wearing a sharp, custom-fitted navy suit that easily cost $2,000. But what really caught my eye was the heavy, gleaming silver watch on his left wrist. A brand new Rolex. He was casually swirling a glass of expensive bourbon, leaning against the fireplace mantel. Business is absolutely booming, Julian was telling my father, a smug smile plastered across his face. I just signed a lease for a premium corner office space downtown, overlooking the river. It is an investment in the brand, you know? You have to spend money to make money. My father was beaming, patting Julian on the shoulder. That is my boy. I always knew you had the aggressive instinct for real estate. I stood in the doorway, feeling a strange disconnect. A Rolex? A premium downtown office? Just 3 years ago, he claimed his assets were completely tied up and he could not afford to help our mother. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself that maybe his consulting business really had taken off. Maybe he was finally going to start contributing. But 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice sounded thin, frantic, and laced with that familiar guilt-tripping tone she used whenever she needed something. "Gwen, honey," she started, sighing heavily into the receiver. "I was just talking to Julian about the medical fund. The balance is getting dangerously low. The insurance company denied my latest scan, and we have a massive out-of-pocket deductible due next week. Your father is so stressed with the hardware store. Do you think you could pick up a few extra design clients this month? We really need you to bump up your contribution. Maybe $2,000 instead of your usual amount." I sat perfectly still in my desk chair. The math was not matching. If Julian's business was booming, if he was buying luxury watches and leasing penthouse offices, why was my mother begging the exhausted graphic designer for an extra $1,000? Why was the burden still entirely on my shoulders? I hung up the phone after vaguely promising to see what I could do. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. The cognitive dissonance was deafening. My brother was living like a millionaire, my mother was crying about going broke, and I was the only one actually paying the bills. I needed to know what was happening to my money. The opportunity to investigate practically fell into my lap a week later. My mother called to complain that her old desktop computer was running incredibly slow and asked if I could come over and fix it. She and my father were terrible with technology. Years ago, before the cancer, I had set up a shared family email account for them so they could manage household bills and stay in touch with relatives. I was the one who created the password, and I was still listed as the recovery email. I went over on a Tuesday afternoon while my father was at the store and Julian was supposedly at his fancy new office. My mother let me in, offered me a glass of iced tea, and then went out to the garden to tend to her tomatoes. I sat down at the bulky desktop computer in the den. I cleared the cache, ran a virus scan, and opened the web browser to make sure it was working smoothly. When the browser opened, it automatically loaded the old shared family email inbox. They never logged out. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My heart started beating a little faster. My palms felt sweaty against the plastic mouse. I knew that snooping was a violation of privacy. I knew that if they caught me, they would be furious. But the image of Julian's gleaming Rolex flashed in my mind, followed by the sound of my mother begging me for more money. I took a deep breath, moved the cursor to the search bar, and typed the word fund. Hundreds of emails populated the screen. Most of them were automated alerts from the bank, confirming deposits and withdrawals. I clicked on a bank statement from 2 months prior. The screen loaded a PDF. I scrolled down, looking for my name. There it was. An inbound transfer of $1,350, clearly marked from my freelance business account. I scrolled further down to see where that money had gone. There was a payment to the oncology clinic for $400. There was a payment to the pharmacy for $200. And then, at the bottom of the page, there was a massive outbound transfer. $1,800, wired directly to a limited liability company that I knew belonged to Julian. The memo line simply read, "Consulting fees." I stopped breathing. The air left my lungs in a sharp rush. I clicked on another statement from 6 months ago. Another deposit from me. Another withdrawal from Julian. This time, it was $2,000, withdrawn the exact same week he posted photos on Instagram from a luxury vacation in Cabo San Lucas. I sat there in the quiet den, the hum of the old computer tower sounding like a jet engine in my ears. I traced the money back, month by month, year by year. Over the course of 4 years, I had poured roughly $65,000 into that account. It was the money I had traded my youth and my health for. And my brother had been systematically bleeding it dry to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. The sheer scale of the theft was paralyzing, but what completely broke me was not the bank statements. It was the emails between my family members. I dug deeper into the inbox, searching Julian's name. I found a thread from a year ago between Julian and my father. Julian had written, "Dad, I am moving some of the liquid assets from the care fund into a short-term holding account to generate better yield. I also took a small management percentage for my time, as we discussed. I am using it to cover the deposit on the new downtown office space. It will make the family business look much more legitimate to investors." My father replied less than an hour later, "Good thinking, Julian. You have to leverage what you have. Keep the fund growing. I am proud of your resourceful allocation." Resourceful allocation. That was what my father called stealing his daughter's cancer money to pay for his son's office space. My father knew. He explicitly approved it. The nausea hit me so hard, I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of the chair. But the final nail in the coffin came from my mother. I found a forwarded email from the hospital's billing department. It was a formal, thank you letter acknowledging a massive lump sum payment that had cleared a major portion of her surgical debt. The hospital had addressed the letter directly to me, Gwen, since my name was on the originating wire transfer. But my mother had received the email copy. She had forwarded it to Julian with a note attached. "Look how much the fund paid off today. Thank you so much, Julian, for managing all of this stress for us. You are taking such good care of this family." She completely erased me. She saw my name on the hospital receipt, ignored it, and thanked the son who was actively robbing her. They all knew. Maybe my mother did not know the exact dollar amounts Julian was stealing, but she knew he was in control, and she chose to blindly worship him while demanding more blood from me. I did not cry. The sadness evaporated instantly, burned away by a white-hot, blinding rage. It was a pure, clarifying anger. Every late night, every rejected date, every pain in my wrist, every cheap meal of ramen noodles flashed before my eyes. I had not been saving my family. I had been financing a delusion. I quietly forwarded every single bank statement, every receipt, and every damning email thread to my own private address. I cleared the browser history, shut down the computer, and walked out into the garden to tell my mother her computer was fixed. I smiled at her, kissed her on the cheek, and drove home. I was done being the victim. Even with the digital evidence sitting safely in my inbox, a tiny, pathetic part of my heart still wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding. I wanted to give them one final chance to be decent human beings. To confess. To say thank you. To acknowledge my existence. I invited my parents out to dinner that Friday at a quiet, mid-priced Italian restaurant in town. Julian was too busy closing deals to join us, which was exactly what I wanted. We sat in a leather booth, picking at garlic bread. I waited until the main courses arrived before I gently steered the conversation toward the finances. "I was doing my taxes earlier this week," I said casually, swirling my fork in a plate of pasta. Looking back at the last 4 years, it is crazy how much money went into the family care fund. I mean, I have transferred over $60,000 of my own freelance income into that account since Mom got sick. I watched their faces carefully. My father did not miss a beat. He took a sip of his red wine, waving his hand dismissively in the air. "You helped out a little bit, Gwen, and we appreciate it. Every penny counts." But let us be honest, it was Julian's financial management that kept us afloat. If he had not stepped in to consolidate the debts and invest the float, we would have lost the house. He took on a massive, stressful burden for this family. "A little bit?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Dad, I funded almost the entire account. Julian hasn't put his own money in. Have you ever actually looked at the inbound transfer logs?" My mother placed her hand over mine, giving it a patronizing squeeze. "Gwen, please do not start this sibling rivalry thing tonight. Your brother is working so hard. He just bought a beautiful new car. He is expanding his business. He has a lot of overhead. You should be proud of him, not jealous over who paid what bill. We are a family. We do not keep score. We do not keep score. Unless, of course, Julian was the one scoring." I looked at the two people sitting across from me. They looked healthy, comfortable, and completely oblivious to the fact that they were sitting across from a ghost. I realized in that exact moment that they were not victims of Julian's manipulation. They were his willing enablers. They preferred a successful lie over an uncomfortable truth. The last remaining drop of familial love I had for them froze completely solid. I smiled politely, paid for the dinner with the same money they took for granted, and walked to my car. The test was over. They had failed. I needed an ally. I could not do this alone, because I knew exactly how my family operated. If I just went to them and yelled, they would gaslight me. My father would call me hysterical. My mother would cry and play the victim. Julian would spin a complex web of corporate jargon to explain away the stolen money, and I would leave feeling like the crazy one. I needed absolute, undeniable tactics. I called Maya. Maya was my best friend from college. She was sharp, fiercely loyal, and worked as a senior crisis communications manager for a public relations firm. If anyone knew how to control a narrative and destroy a liar, it was Maya. We met at a dimly lit coffee shop downtown on a rainy Saturday morning. I did not bother with small talk. I just opened my laptop, turned the screen toward her, and started opening the PDFs. I showed her the bank statements. I showed her the dates of my deposits lining up perfectly with Julian's withdrawals for his Cabo vacation, his Rolex, and his office lease. I showed her the email from my dad praising Julian for taking a management percentage. Maya sat in absolute silence for 20 minutes, reading through the documents. Her jaw got tighter and tighter with every page. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were blazing with a terrifying, beautiful fury. "This is not just unfair, Gwen," Maya said, her voice a low, intense whisper. "This is literal financial abuse. Your brother is a parasite and your parents are feeding you to him." "I know," I said, feeling a tear finally slip down my cheek. "I just want them to see me. I want them to admit what they did. But if I just confront them, they will twist it." Maya shook her head, closing my laptop with a definitive snap. "Then we don't just confront them. We execute a flawless public relations strike. You cannot do this in private. Narcissists thrive in private because there are no witnesses. You have to do it in front of the audience they care about the most. Their extended family. Their friends. Their little country club social circle." She leaned across the small table, grabbing my hands. "We are going to build a dossier. A physical, heavy, undeniable mountain of proof. You cannot just text them screenshots. They will delete them. You need paper. You need something they have to hold in their hands and look at. We are going straight for the jugular." The next 7 days were a blur of meticulous, cold-blooded preparation. My apartment turned into a war room. Maya came over every evening after her corporate job, bringing highlighters, sticky notes, and a terrifying level of organizational skill. We went through every single month of the past 4 years. It was a masterclass in forensic accounting. We printed out every single bank statement from the Family Care Fund. Maya took a bright green marker and highlighted every single deposit that came from my freelance account. Then, she took a blood-red marker and highlighted every withdrawal Julian had made for personal expenses. Next to the red lines, we stapled the corresponding receipts and invoices we had found in the email account, the receipt for the Rolex, the invoice for the downtown office lease, the property tax payment for my father's failing hardware store. We printed the hospital's thank you letter that had my name explicitly printed on it, the one my mother had used to praise Julian. We printed the email thread where my father authorized Julian to skim money off the top. I went to a high-end office supply store and bought the thickest, most intimidating black leather binder I could find. We punched holes in the hundreds of pages and locked them into the metal rings. We added plastic tab dividers. Tab 1, Inbound Contributions. Tab 2, Julian's Luxury Expenses. Tab 3, The Cover-Up Emails. As the binder grew thicker, something inside me fundamentally shifted. The girl who used to cry because her mother didn't put her art trophy on the mantle was gone. The exhausted freelancer who ruined her wrist trying to buy her father's approval was dead. I was no longer a daughter seeking love. I was an auditor. I was an executioner. I weighed the heavy black binder in my hands. It felt like holding a loaded weapon. The annual backyard barbecue is this Saturday, I told Maya, staring at the black leather cover. All the aunts, uncles, and family friends will be there. Julian loves showing off at the barbecue. Maya smirked, a dangerous glint in her eye. Perfect. A captive audience. Remember, Gwen. Do not yell. Do not cry. You are the one with the facts. Let them do the panicking. I slept soundly that night for the first time in 4 years. I didn't wear my wrist brace. I didn't dream about unpaid invoices or hospital waiting rooms. I dreamed about the look on Julian's face when his glass house finally shattered. Which brings us back to that suffocatingly hot July afternoon in Wichita. The backyard was buzzing. Everyone who mattered in my parents' social orbit was there. Aunt Brenda was gossiping by the potato salad. Diane, a longtime family friend who had known us since we were in diapers, was sitting on a lawn chair fanning herself. Julian was in rare form. He was wearing an expensive linen button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up just enough to make sure the silver Rolex caught the afternoon sun. He was holding a craft beer, surrounded by 3 of my uncles, talking loudly about market volatility and synergistic acquisitions. My father stood next to him, practically glowing with pride, nodding along as if Julian were Warren Buffett. I stood on the periphery, the heavy canvas bag digging into my shoulder. I had promised Maya I would wait for the perfect opening. I didn't have to wait long. The uncles eventually dispersed, leaving Julian, my father, my mother, and a few close relatives near the patio table. I walked over, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I decided to cast the bait. "Hey Dad," I said, keeping my voice light and pleasant. "I actually got some really great news this week. I just signed a massive design contract with a national retail chain. It is the biggest account I have ever landed. I am going to be leading their entire winter rebrand." The patio went quiet. My mother looked at me, a polite, vacant smile on her face. "That is nice, sweetie," she murmured, before immediately turning her head. "Julian, did you hear that? Your sister got a nice little project." Julian took a sip of his beer, looking at me with a patronizing smirk. "Good for you, Gwen. Just make sure you read the contract carefully. Freelancers always get screwed on the net 90 payment terms. If you need me to have my legal guy look it over, just ask." I felt the familiar sting, but I let it wash over me. I looked at my dad. He was glaring at me, clearly annoyed that I had interrupted Julian's spotlight. He pointed his metal grilling tongs at me. "You will never be like your brother," my father sneered, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Julian is building an empire. He has a mind for real business. You are just playing around with your little pictures on a computer. It is time you face reality, Gwen." The trap was sprung. The audience was watching. Aunt Brenda stopped chewing. Diane looked incredibly uncomfortable. Julian's smirk widened. This was the moment I had feared my entire life. The ultimate rejection. But standing there in the heat, I felt absolutely nothing but cold, hard clarity. I set my plastic cup of water down on the glass table. The condensation pooled around the bottom. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out the massive black binder. I lifted it high and slammed it down onto the center of the patio table. The loud smack echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Conversation stopped instantly. People turned around. I smiled. A cold, dead smile. "Then explain why I funded his luxury life," I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. My father's arm, still holding the tongs, froze midair. The color drained from his face so fast he looked sick. What are you talking about?" he stammered. "Open it," I commanded. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. The quiet authority in my voice made my mother physically flinch. Julian stepped forward, trying to maintain his arrogant posture, but his eyes darted nervously to the binder. "Gwen, do not do this embarrassing dramatic act right now. We have guests." "Open the binder, Julian," I said, stepping closer to him. "Show everyone your brilliant business acumen." When nobody moved, I reached over and flipped the heavy leather cover open myself. I turned to the first tab. The bright green highlights screamed off the page. $65,000, I announced, projecting my voice so Aunt Brenda and Diane and everyone else could hear clearly. That is exactly how much money I transferred from my little picture drawing business into the family care fund over the last 4 years to pay for Mom's cancer treatments. Because you, I pointed directly at Julian, claimed you were broke. I grabbed a fistful of pages and flipped to the second tab. The red highlights looked like blood. And this, I continued, slamming my finger onto a bank statement, is a withdrawal for $2,000 signed by Julian, the exact same week he flew to Cabo. Here is the invoice for his premium downtown office lease, paid directly from the medical fund. And here, I picked up a glossy receipt, holding it up in the air, is the receipt for that beautiful silver Rolex he is wearing right now. Paid for with the money I earned while sleeping in a wrist brace so our mother wouldn't die. The silence in the backyard was absolute. The only sound was the sizzling of meat on the grill. Aunt Brenda gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Diane stood up from her lawn chair, staring at Julian with pure disgust. Julian's face went pale, then flushed bright red. That is out of context. I was managing the fund. I took a standard management fee to reinvest. You stole from your sick mother, Diane interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. You stole from your sister. My mother was trembling, gripping the edge of the table. Gwen, please, you are ruining the party. We can talk about this inside. We are done talking, I said, flipping to the final tab. I pulled out the printed email thread. Because the worst part isn't that Julian is a thief. The worst part is that you both knew. Here is an email from Dad, praising Julian for his resourceful allocation of the funds to pay for his office. Here is Mom, thanking Julian for paying the hospital bill that had my name printed right on it. I looked at my father. The man who had belittled me my entire life looked small, pathetic, and completely destroyed. He dropped the grill tongs. They clattered against the wooden deck. He couldn't even look me in the eye. I am officially cutting you off, I said, my voice steady, feeling a massive, crushing weight lift off my shoulders. The account is frozen. I am not giving you another dime. You chose your golden boy. Now you can let him pay your bills. Have a great barbecue. I turned around and walked across the grass. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody said a word. I walked out the side gate, got into my car, and drove away. The fallout was spectacular, and it happened faster than I could have ever imagined. Without my monthly influx of cash to prop up the illusion, the entire house of cards collapsed in a matter of weeks. Julian's booming business was exposed for what it was, a hollow shell built on my money. He defaulted on the expensive downtown office lease because he couldn't make the next payment. A month later, his luxury sports car was repossessed right out of his driveway. Word traveled fast in Wichita, especially after Diane and Aunt Brenda told every single person in their social circle what had happened at the barbecue. Julian became a pariah. Nobody wanted to do business with the guy who stole his mother's cancer fund. My father's hardware store, no longer secretly subsidized by me, finally hit the wall. He had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy to restructure his massive debts. The stress aged him 10 years in a few months. They tried to call me, of course. My phone blew up for weeks. My mother left tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding, saying they were desperate and needed help with the mortgage. My father sent long, rambling text messages blaming Julian for manipulating them. I listened to the voicemails once, felt absolutely nothing, and then permanently blocked their numbers. I was free. The money I had been pouring into that black hole stayed in my own bank account. For the first time in my adult life, I had savings. I moved out of my leaky, depressing apartment and leased a beautiful, modern loft downtown with massive windows that let the sunlight pour in. My graphic design business skyrocketed. That national retail contract I had mentioned at the barbecue? It was a massive success, leading to referrals that tripled my income in a single year. I bought myself a new car. I went on vacation to Italy with Maya. I started dating again, this time without the crushing anxiety of poverty hanging over my head. I finally understood that my worth was not determined by people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I had built my own empire, entirely in the dark, and